The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the third day of this 7-day sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico. And I'd like to share a little bit about the life of Shidō Bunan Zenji, who was Dokyo Etan Zenji's teacher, who was Hakuin, Ekaku Zenji's teacher. And Gudo Toshoku, who you will find familiar because of the Rinzai lineage, was Shidō Bunan's teacher. Shidō Bunan was born and raised in a post house, a way station, an inn on the Tokaido, the Great Eastern Road between Kyoto and Tokyo, called Edo back then, as was Hakuin, not the same village. And they are, several generations apart. I mean, Shidō Bunan is Hakuin's grandfather in Zen. Shidō, as a young boy, was famous in the neighborhood because he excelled at what is known in English translation as the grass writing script, or kana. One of the hiragana is specifically the kana syllabary. That is one of the segments of the written language of Japan. Japan's written language, actually, there are four writing languages that every Japanese kid who goes to school these days learns. The earliest one is the hiragana, which is one of the two kana syllabaries, they're called. And it's a beautiful, beautiful script. Very, well, it's been deemed a feminine script. And there was a period of time in Japan where women were not allowed to write any of the other scripts. They were not allowed to write kanji, which is the Chinese characters. And of course, back then they didn't know English. Nowadays, the children learn hiragana, katakana, kanji, and romaji is what they call our alphabet. So I think it must have been a little interesting for this young boy to excel at what was a feminine occupation. But at any rate, he was in line to inherit the inn. At the same time, he showed unusual connection to a yearning for practice. When he was 15, his father took him along and they traveled to Tokyo, I believe it was, Edo back then. And during that period of time, it was one of the great wars that was going on in Japan, and there was a great deal of pain and suffering in evidence, and it registered deeply on the young boy whose first name was Miki. And so Gudo Toshoku used to, when he would travel, stop at Shidō Bunan's family inn. And Shidō got to know him then and asked him all kinds of questions about Zen. Eventually he had a kensho. There's a little bit of confusion in the writing of his life story. Some of the dates are odd. It says that he was ordained at 52, but it also says that at 47, he went around to various different masters of various different temples to seek their teaching. But he already had that ordination theoretically by Gudo Toshiku. But anyway, whatever had happened is not as relevant to us these days as the fact that he was a layman for a long time. And in fact, even though he set about doing deep practice for many years, then he became the inn master, succeeding his father, and married and had kids. And somewhere along the way, kind of lost the way and became addicted to sake and gambling. And Gudo Toshoku didn't know this initially, but one day when he was having to travel and he stopped at the inn, he thought he'd check up on Shidō and see how he was doing, and he wasn't there. And the servant said, he's out. And then at midnight, there was a knock on the gate. They did not answer it. They just went to Gudo and said, now watch what happens. And Shidō climbed drunkenly over the gate and berated the servants as soon as he saw them for whatever, and staggered in and was shocked to discover Gudo sitting in Zazen. Gudo had heard the story of how Shidō was behaving and had been begged by the rest of the family to help somehow with this difficult situation. And so he said, okay, get me the best sake and 2 cups. And so that was prepared, and they all went off back to bed, and Shidō sat doing zazen, and then of course, Gudo sat doing zazen, and the Shidō climbed over the front gate and staggered in and was horribly shocked. And Gudo said, they told me that something like this was going on. Life is short. Are you interested in continuing this way? And Shidō said no. And Gudo said, well, then let us share this sake until the urge to drink is gone from you. And so they stayed up all night drinking. And it's amazing that Shidō didn't pass out, actually, since he was already drunk to start with. And then Gudo said, now I've got to be on my way. And Shidō said, well, let me go along with you and accompany you a little bit. Gudo was in a high enough position that he was carried around in a palanquin, a carrying chair that what was used sort of a wheelless vehicle, except the wheels were 4 strong men who carried it on their shoulders. And so Gudo got in his palanquin, and Shidō Bunan accompanied it. And then at a certain point, Gudo said, thanks for the accompaniment, but now it's time for you to go back home to your family. And Shidō said, no, just a little bit further. And then this happened several times. And they finally got to Edo, to a temple. At that point, Shidō said, the family will be taken care of. The inn will be taken care of. I have a successor. There is no problem. I do not need to go back. Will you please ordain me? And he did. Prior to that, whole series of events, when he was much younger, Gudo had actually given him a Buddhist name, Kogai, which that's somewhere the translation of that name. It's a beautiful name. I believe it's one beyond time, one who is beyond time. Oh my, we have thunder. This is exciting. So when he ordained him, he named him Shidō Bunan. Now, Shidō Bunan is the first characters in a teaching poem that was written by the third ancestor, the third Zen ancestor. And that is the third ancestor, Bodhidharma being the first. And it is called Shinshin Mei, and there's a copy of this chant in our chant book. Affirming faith in mind is how it was translated in Rochester. And it begins, the great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose. When preferences are cast aside, the way stands clear and undisguised. And Shido is the great way. Bunan is not difficult. It's a rather wonderful, wonderful name, and expressed his truth, because he did indeed, although he got sidetracked with the alcohol and the gambling for a bit, he did break through deeply. It is said that before he was given the name Kogai, that Gudo noticed that Shidō was sitting down trying to make string out of paper. And this is still done in Japan. String is made out of paper. And in that particular case, in the old days in China and Japan, people carried around something called cash, which is where our word for coins comes from in the English language. And in those cases, those countries, it was a string of coins. And so he was making this string to string coins on. The Japanese and the Chinese coins in those eras had center holes, square or round holes. And he was so deeply questioning the koan that Gudo Toshuku had given him, which was a koan that is still used in Rinzai today. From the very beginning, there is not one thing. Honrai muichimotsu. From the very beginning, there has never been a single thing. It's a deep teaching. And he was so absorbed in fathoming this koan that he couldn't even roll his coin string. And Gudo, noticing that, said it won't be long before he has a breakthrough. And it wasn't. And that's when he got the name Kogai. The reason I'm giving you all of this information is that there's a story that is attributed to him, and I will get to that later. Before that, let me tell you that eventually he was given the sanctioning by Godō Toshoku. In fact, he was his only successor. No, that's not correct. He was one of Godō Toshoku's successors. But as far as Shidō Bunan was concerned, Dokyo Etan was his only successor. Although he gave permission to teach to 4 other students of his, the only one who received Inka was Dokyo Etan, and Hakuin was the only one who received Inka from Dokyo Etan. So in that very narrow thread, centuries later, Zen is flourishing in the West. We must guard it carefully. Take advantage of the opportunity to practice it because, and here's where this story comes in. Shidō Bunan was born in 1601, at a time way before the Meiji Restoration, at which time Buddhist priests were mandated to be treated as lay people. They no longer had tax-exempt status and so on and so forth. This was in reaction to a great deal of negative feelings about Buddhism. It was a time where many Buddhist temples were destroyed. This is the Meiji Restoration I'm talking about. And so the Buddhist clergy had to make some sacrifices simply in order for Buddhism to continue to exist in Japan. But this is way before that. One of the things that came out of the Meiji Restoration was that priests could marry. And there are many, many, many married priests in Japan because there's very little in terms of Zen practice in that country these days. It's considered way too difficult. As an example of that, Sogenji is quite famous. Mitra-roshi is quite famous. Everybody in Japan seems to be fascinated by the fact that foreigners come all the way to Japan to undergo strict Zen training. And this is something that they're afraid to do, many of them, not all of them. Here and there, there's a brave young man. It's usually a young man, not so much the young women, who deigns to enter a Japanese Zen monastery for more than just the perfunctory training of two years that will give them the education required to pass an examination, which would legalize their status as one able to head a temple. It's not to be a teacher, but one to be sort of like a parish priest. And at any rate, so in the national television station is frequently coming to Sogenji to do specials on Sogenji. They did it, I think, 3 different times when I was actually living at Sogenji, and one time was a 4-part special. And during that 4-part special, they asked if the station asked if 2 of their employees who would be making the video would be able to be at Sogenji in training for a week. And if they agreed to do that, then they would be allowed to do this 4-part series. And so there's one scene in the one segment of the series where this young woman who's part of the team is being introduced to the keisaku. And the keisaku, as you see, is sitting on our altar, although we don't use it. It's a great big long stick. And it's not used in anger. It's not used as punishment. The whole point in the keisaku is to help people deepen their practice. And so the only person who is allowed to use it according to his own discretion at Sogenji is Mitra-roshi himself. Nobody else is allowed to use it unless it's being asked for, or if someone in the Zendo appears to be nodding off. And then it is prescribed that it must be used at that point to help them wake up, both literally and figuratively. And so this young woman was being taught how to receive the keisaku. Since people sit facing into the room, you bow forward after you've asked for the keisaku. You bow forward, you take off your rakusu, and then you're struck 2 times and on each shoulder. 4 times in the winter because your robes are heavier. And so they struck her once and she goes, "Ay, die, die, die." Oh, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts. That's the image the modern Japanese have of Zen training. Shidō Bunan, because it was not anywhere near the Meiji Restoration, was a very humble human being. He did not go the way of most Zen priests in that era in many ways. One of the reasons why Hakuin, 2 generations later, had to completely resurrect Buddhism, or Rinzai Buddhism anyway, was because by that time, Zen had been almost co-opted by the samurai. And so they supported the temples. They determined who was going to be a priest and who wasn't. And the priesthood was largely not much different from being a layperson. They were engaged in intellectual pursuit, writing Chinese poetry, philosophical discussions, and wearing gorgeous robes, and generally being on display. Shidō Bunan chose not to do any of that. And in fact, he wrote nothing in Chinese. Everything he wrote was in kana, actually, apparently. That beautiful grass script that he was so famous for knowing and being able to do even as a child. He lived humbly. And in fact, at one point, he was asked to come to some kind of gathering at a temple. And he arrived in a shabby robe, tattered sandals. And of course, everybody else was beautifully fitted out. And when they saw him coming in his shabby outfit, they presented him with a brand new pair of sandals. And he said, "What? I came here to get sandals?" He was in a small temple, a very small temple. And one day, and I think some of you know this story, a young woman in the village was accused of, well, actually he wasn't accused, he was accused. She became pregnant, and she wasn't married, and he was accused of being the father her parents tried to get her to let them know who the father was, and she refused for a long time. And then finally she said, it's that priest, Bunan. So when the baby was born, the family marched this infant over to this tiny little temple. Hermitage really is what it was, and presented this baby to this priest. Now, it's very difficult in our modern society to comprehend the extreme enormity of this. In those days, priests were celibate, and certainly Shidō Bunan was. And to become pregnant out of wedlock was not something that was accepted in the way that it is in America these days by any means. And on top of that, this young girl is like 16 years old and he's in his 50s. So they present the child to him. Here, this is your responsibility. Take care of it. And Shidō Bunan, expressing profoundly awakened mind, simply said something that is very difficult to translate into English. I mean, we can translate it literally. It literally means, is this so? But an American or a Westerners company, when they are confronted by such an event, there is not, is this so, would be more like, oh yeah, is this so? But it wasn't. It's in Japanese use, it's an extremely humble expression that means something like, oh, I see, it looks like that, huh? And he received the baby without further complaint. The entire village scorned him. They wouldn't feed him. He had to struggle to find some way to not only to eat, but also to take care of this infant. It is said that he carried it around on his back like an old grandmother. And we can be sure that he nurtured this child. One of the things that Gudo Toshoku noted about him was his great compassionate nature. And then after a year, the mother confessed who the father really was. So now the grandparents are deeply embarrassed. And they go back with their heads hanging low, bowing deeply, and ask for the baby back. And again, all he says is, Soka, Soka. No defense, no, well, you should have realized I would not have done something like that. How could you have accused me of something like that? None of that. He had no need to defend. He was so profoundly clear and open that it is impossible to describe, but it is a very real experience that any one of you can have. It's built in. This is a window into our true nature, a deep window. And I'm sharing this with you. I wish I could share with you how exactly it feels, because the immense freedom that this man possessed, freedom not to have to be caught by anything, but to be clear and compassionate, even in the face of such accusations that all but ruined him. For a whole year, he had a really rough time finding anything to eat. and then also having to take care of an infant back before they had things like formula and baby diapers, well, paper diapers anyway. I'm sure they had some kind, well, they might not have, because in Asia, when my kids were little, one of them was still in diapers when we went to live in Burma. And the Burmese kids, they just wear a shirt and nothing from there down until they have toilet trained themselves. And then they start wearing pants or skirts. Well, it wasn't skirts, it was longi, they call them. It's kind of a sarong. But the deeper you go in your practice, the more you are liable to catch glimpses of this state of mind, this amazingly free state of mind that is so clear that instantly it's understood how to respond. And respond is the word. There's no need for any reactivity. There's no felt need for any reactivity. And again, this is your original face in action. Shidō Bunan also was a proponent of continuing practice, as was Hakuin, as was Torii Enji, who was the compiler of his biography, by the way. Torii Enji is the successor of Hakuin, who was so famous for expounding on the urgent need for the long maturation. And Shido Bunan also spoke of this. And let me share with you some things that he said. First of all, here's a poem. When you penetrate the fundamental origin, you go beyond all phenomena. You know there's a realm beyond all words, which the Buddhas and patriarchs could not transmit. When you penetrate the fundamental origin, you go beyond all phenomena. And it's not going beyond all phenomena as dissociation. It's going beyond all phenomena so present that there's nobody that needs to react. And he also said, Bunan said to a gathering, even though our school takes Satori as its root, one should not think that he may rest after Satori is gained. The way must be exhausted through practice, which in Japanese is called shugyo. And so if you're training at Sogenji or another Japanese Zen temple, you're a shugosha, one who is doing shugyo, spiritual practice. In nyoho, nyoho means to know the original mind as it is. Practice means to annihilate karma with wisdom gained by Satori. To have Satori is rather easy, but to apply it in daily life is most difficult. Therefore, the Bodhidharma said, those who know the way are many, those who practice it, few. And let me read this again because it is so vital. Even though our school takes Satori as its root, one should not think that he may rest after Satori is gained. The way must be exhausted through practice, through ongoing deepening Zen practice, and through the bringing to life in everything we do or say or think, this awakened experience. Not to react to situations out of habit, out of conditioning, but out of clear mind to respond. The way must be exhausted through practice in Yoho. Yoho means to know the original mind as it is. And so our habit patterns become clear and obvious as we're doing Zazen, even before we reach Kensho. And this is incredible opportunity to let them go and to become a little bit more free, to build the solid ground so that when we do have Kensho, it will be strong and deep and effective. To have Satori is rather easy, but to apply it in daily life is most difficult, most challenging, and something that so many Zen practitioners, not knowing any better because it wasn't really emphasized in the earlier years in practice in the West, simply ignored. If we're to be truly realized, truly awakened, that doesn't just mean having an experience of Kensho. It means living that truth in everything we do or say or think. And we can. We have this marvelous practice. Right now, we are nearing the halfway point of Sesshin. Dive in deeper. Give yourself so fully that you forget yourself, as Shidō Bunan did when he was trying to roll that paper into string. Here, where you are in the Zendo at Mountain Gate, within the confines of Mountain Gate, there it is an optimal field of practice. There are few responsibilities that could take you away from practice. Actually, no responsibilities that would take you away from practice. So it's an incredible opportunity. And even for those of you who might only be able to come to the Sesshin through Zoom for a day or the weekend or whatever, even that much is vital. And even more important to give yourselves to this practice deeply, sincerely, with enormous commitment, not tension, just dropping deep into the practice. Exploring your own mind, opening to the point where you understand that from the very origin, there's never been a single thing. And then there's a further step. As it says on the scroll behind me, out of not one thing arise the 10,000 things. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. I leave that with you. We still have a few more minutes. Let me see. Yes, we still have a few more minutes of sitting before the period ends. But consider deeply that story of Shidō Bunan and the baby. If you can comprehend intimately his mind state, you will understand the wonder of Zazen and the potential you have to go even deeper. Thank you for listening. Stop now and recite the 4 vows.